Hello, my name is Lawrence Taylor, and I will be presenting my RP project titled Binding Lead in Soil. My research was conducted at Beltsville Agricultural Research Center with Dr. Eaton Codling and Ms. Gaisi. So to start off, I would like to explain why my topic is important and the main purpose for our experimentation. In farms all over the country, they utilize herbicides to kill unwanted plants surrounding their crops. They do this because plants get all of their minerals from the soil, and if there are other plants surrounding your crop, they will take the minerals that could be used for your crop to make it more nutritious, to have a bigger crop, and to thus make more money. The problem with herbicides is that it leaves lead and other heavy metals within the soil that can later be transferred to other plants that you would grow in that same soil. So we wanted to find a way to bind the lead to a different material in the soil that will prevent it from being uptaken by new crops. So the two byproducts that we tested were poultry litter ash and wood compost. Poultry litter ash is just the bedding, the manure, any leftover feed from a chicken farm, and it's burned to an ash and ground to a fine powder. The other treatment that we tested is wood compost, which is just essentially wood chips. So to start, we had to prep the pots and the different labels for each of the pots. So the first thing that we did was we washed all of the pots for the plants and all of the dishes that would go underneath each of the pots to collect any leftover water. We also had to cut these mesh circles to put in the bottom of the pots to prevent any of the soil from coming out of the bottom. And then we had to label each of the pots with the soil type, the treatment percentage, and then the plant type. So we tested two different plants with the two different treatments, and then we did two different intensities of these treatments. So the two different plants were oregano and cilantro. The two different treatments, like I said, were poultry litter ash and wood compost. And then we did 2% wood compost, 2% poultry litter ash, and then 4% poultry litter ash and 4% wood compost. And what the 2% and the 4% mean, it's just the weight of the soil that you have, 2% of that soil is going to be either treatments. And in this case, we had 1,350 grams of lead-contaminated soil from an apple orchard in Washington State. And what happened with that soil, it was contaminated by herbicides they were used to spray the weeds underneath their apple trees. So we weighed out 1,350 grams of that soil, and then 2% of that would be 27 grams, and then 4% would be 54 grams. So we tested 27 grams of poultry litter ash, 54 grams of poultry litter ash, 27 grams of wood compost, 54 grams of wood compost, and then we did one group with no treatment at all, just to see how much lead would get into the plant if there were no effects on it. So after we cleaned our pots and cut the mesh circles for the pots, we had to dry the soil to get rid of any moisture that was in it so we could get an accurate weight of the soil. So the way we did that, we spread the soil very thinly on tarps in a room, and we set up a couple of fans, and we waited until about 2 or 3 days to get the soil to an even and dry consistency. So while the soil was drying, I spent a lot of time grinding the poultry litter ash because it was too thick to be in the soil mixture. After that, I had to weigh the poultry litter ash and the wood compost. So like I said before, it was 54 grams and 27 grams. So I had to do that for the amount of reps we were doing for each plant and soil type, which was 3. So we did 3 repetitions of each experimental group. So after we dried the soil and had the poultry litter ash ground to a powder, we added, we weighed out 1,350 grams of the soil and then added each of the additives to a specific pot that would have a specific plant in either cilantro or oregano. After that, we had to dampen the soil again to prep it for the seedlings, and we planted the seeds and we left it in our greenhouse for we let them grow for about a month. And while this was happening, we were doing different studies on the effects of lead poisoning on human beings and just different cases of how lead got into the soil. I learned that lead poison, like if you were to eat a plant that was grown in lead contaminated soil, you could get the effects of lead poisoning, which includes like nausea, headaches, stomach cramps, and even in small children, it could cause developmental issues. So I thought that was interesting, and that made me want to study this even further so we can prevent this from happening, because it's a simple solution, and at the end I'll let you know how this worked out and which treatment worked the best. So as they were growing, we watered them with deionized water for we watered them about, I would say 3 to 4 times a week, depending on the dryness of the soil. So if the soil was really, really dry, we would water that plant a little bit more than a pot that had was moister than the other pots. So after they grew for a while, we cut the oregano and the cilantro off, and we had to wash it to make sure that all of the soil particles are off of the plant before we processed it, because that would affect the lead content. Obviously, if you take the lead from the soil and then test that, you're going to have high levels of lead. And we were just trying to see what was within the plant. So after we harvested the oregano and the cilantro, we washed it and we bagged it and labeled it according to the labels on the pots. After that, we had to dry the oregano and the cilantro. It was basically an oven, but it wasn't as hot as the oven at your home gets. So it dried out the oregano and the cilantro, and I had to grind those into a fine powder, because the process that we were doing, we only needed about 2 grams of each of the plants. So what we did was we ground the cilantro or the oregano, and then we would weigh 2 grams out of the entire plant sample that we got. And we made sure to mix the samples very well so we can get like an even reading of the entire plant, not just like the stems or just the leaves or just the flowers of the plants. We mixed it to make sure we got an even reading. And we found that the wood compost 2% was the most effective out of all of the treatments. We found that with the poultry litter ash 4%, it actually was burning the seeds before they could even grow. Dr. Conley explained that that's probably because of all of the different other elements that are in the poultry litter ash and that are in the manure and the different things that are in poultry litter ash that just was too much for the seedling. So we found that the 2% wood compost did the best, and I believe that means that the less amount of wood compost that you use for binding lead and soil will be more effective than a greater amount, because it even performed better than the 4% wood compost. Thank you.